I love flow states. I have a history of what I kind of consider prenatal and very early life trauma that I don't remember. I have it documented in letters that my mom wrote to my grandma. I don't need to get into the details of that mess, but the message is that a lot of trauma is nonverbal. And for me, when I access a flow state, that it's flow states are typically nonverbal unless we're singing. And when I access flow states, it's such a good positive thing for my nervous system. And I use surfing as an example for me of where I really seek out and search for a flow state. It's definitely a drive. It's definitely one of the things that I find most beautiful about surfing. And I'm not a great surfer, but I do surf a lot, and I am a competent top to bottom surfer. I know how to handle crowds and stay out of people's way, and I generally have a really good time. With surfing, it is almost once you develop the skill of surfing, it's very easy to enter a flow state. But one of the early lessons that you learn when surfing, after you're able to stand up on the wave, you need to figure out how to turn, obviously, and also how to go faster or slower on the wave. And one of the big secrets on how to figure out where you are going to go on a wave in the ocean is that you quickly realize that it's almost magical. Wherever you look is where you tend to go. So you look where you want to go. And I find, for me, this is a big metaphor and analogy for things in life, including things like finance or career, because as soon as you figure out, wow, this is magical, I can pretty much go where I look, then knowing where to go becomes the next question. And surfing is not, by definition, an entirely safe activity. Most people think of dangers of surfing as being sharks, which are really relatively small on the risk spectrum. Much more dangerous than sharks would be things like rocks, which actually don't move. But if you are on the board and looking where you are going, and you see rocks and you look at the rock, that is where you tend to go. So one of the key things, I call it a breakaway look, is if there's something, as soon as you recognize a threat or something that you're scared of, you have to assess how and learn how to look away from what you are scared of. And so that's just really, I guess, in a nutshell, one of the predominantly important and I think naturally easy to understand thing about flow. Neurologically speaking, flow, as I said, gets us out of our sense of self. And trauma is a sense of where we're really focused on ourselves. And also certain aspects of substance abuse and drug addiction is a very self-oriented feature. So flow states, by their very nature, can lead us away from these things. So where I mean, the first time I really think I experienced flow was in a sports camp where soccer, football as it's called in the rest of the part of the world. I'm not a good soccer player. I played a little bit in 7th grade, but I went to a summer camp, and I don't know what it was about that day that it was like my day. And I was able to achieve a much higher rate of skill on the pitch than I ever would have given my normal skill. And I think it was because I was in a flow state. And I'm happy Guy is here, because we just did a podcast where I talked a little bit about flow states with Guy. And what so that was kind of an early age experience for me. But as a young man, I went overseas and I studied and lived in Nagoya, Japan in my early 20s for about 5 years. I taught English, and I also studied martial arts. I studied shiatsu. I learned to play the flute there, and studied Tai Chi and many other things. And in these processes, I was exposed to some of the literature of the ancient Japanese sword masters, which I had a great interest in at the time. And one of the epitome of a sword teacher in Japan at this time, this was in the 1500s, was a Japanese Zen Buddhist monk named Takuan Soho. And he was consulted by samurai and sword masters for his deep insight into the psychological and spiritual aspects of the martial arts. And he wrote 3 letters to sword masters discussing flow states in his given term. He talked about how the mind in flow is like a ball floating through a mountain stream. It never ceases its motion. It can get brought up into an eddy, but it never stops, and then it spontaneously releases. And in these letters, he also talked about how when in a combat situation with the sword, which essentially what the samurai were training for their whole life, these people had way more than their 10,000 hours in on the sword work. When facing an opponent, I don't know if you've ever seen a live samurai sword, but it's an awe-inspiring and a very fear-inducing thing. The metal has been forged over 10,000 times, and hundreds to thousands of hours will go into the making of a single sword for some of the classic swords. And it's very easy when looking at a sword, if somebody is holding it, pointing it at you, to have your mind stop. So Takuan talks about if when you are engaging the enemy whose sword is drawn, if your mind stops even for a hair's breadth, that is an opportunity for them to strike you down. And he calls this concept a concept of mushin, or no mind, which is that real state of mental clarity. I think most of us living in nervous systems have achieved this at very short periods of time, either as kids or sometimes adults, where there's this sense of awareness and skill and an ability to act spontaneously. I think of it as a lot like quantum thought. Just like quantum computers are so much, are there, if that's not something you're aware of, you can Google it. Just like quantum computers are so much faster in so many ways than conventional computers, we leave this state of mind where we're self-referential and we're thinking in linear thought patterns, and we leave that, the sense of self kind of separates, and we have an ability to react so much more appropriately and quickly without thinking. And I experienced this on waves many times, certainly not all the time. And so Takuan explained that in the heat of the battle, the mind can really easily be swayed by a myriad of distractions, including fear or anger, or even the desire to win. These are distractions that are self-referential, aren't they? I'm afraid, or I am angry, or I want to beat this guy, that cause the mind to waver and lead to hesitation and mistakes. And Takuan Soho argues that a swordsman must cultivate an unwavering mental focus like the width of a single hair to avoid being influenced by these distractions. So anyway, that's a little bit of a talk on that. But I think that when we utilize our intellectual brain, our cognitive mind, our student brain, where we're studying in school, we are a lot of the times living in the past or the future because we're thinking about the information and how it's filtered through layers of the cognitive process that are relatively slow compared to what I'm calling the quantum mind, because I just thought of that and I don't have a better or faster word for it. And a lot of the times when we're in when we're in thought processes, that's our imagination, where we're creating a scenario of, oh, if I talk to this person, when I talk to my boss, I need to have it go this way, or I was upset with my friend or my partner or one of my kids, and when we talk, we're gonna, and we get this mental construct of how things we want to go in our mind, but that is really an imagination. So anyway, that's my talk on that. I don't know if you found that interesting, but I find, and I think that as we move forward with the science of these flow states, that we're going to see more and more how learning to enter these flow states can be incredibly therapeutic. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments or questions? Because I have other things that I brought to chat about. I've been talking about probiotics all month, which we're still in the early part of April, and I'm going to continue to post videos and also post on LinkedIn in and around these topics. But I think we can get to how probiotics can actually help us with flow states. If anybody doesn't have questions, let's kind of follow that down the path. So first of all, what in the world are probiotics? Probiotics are friendly bacteria that we all have in our digestive tract. And what do I mean by friendly bacteria? Because there are certainly bad bacteria, are there not? Friendly bacteria help us by creating neurotransmitters that make us feel good. There's something called the gut-brain connection, where there's an intimate relationship between the friendly bacteria in our digestive tract and our brain, the gut-brain axis. And so there is a relationship that we have with friendly bacteria where we get something out of it and they get something out of it. The friendly bacteria get a nice place to live and to feed, because we feed them, and they get to reproduce and make their progeny. And we get these beneficial neurotransmitters. We also get beneficial things called short chain fatty acids. And we also are able to, the bacteria will actually digest parts of our food for us that we can't digest on our own. So that's why they're called friendly, is because they help us out. But just like some bacteria can help us out, there's bad bacteria as well. And the bad bacteria do some really cool and interesting things. They kind of train us in a way. So when I eat good food, healthy fruits, I'm thinking of things like blueberries or turmeric, or even polyphenols in green tea. When we eat good bacteria, our friendly gut bacteria like that, and they make neurotransmitters like serotonin that make us feel good. But there are also unfriendly bacteria, and when we eat good food, the unfriendly bacteria don't like it. They want us to eat crappy food, like highly processed food, lots of sugars, those types of things. And our unfriendly bacteria, when we eat those bad foods for us that we know are bad for us, they will also secrete chemicals that for a very short period of time make us feel good. So they give us positive reinforcement. And then we get on YouTube and we watch a couple of videos about how to eat right and how the gut-brain axis is important. And we decide we want to make some changes in our diet, and we switch our diet up. Those bad bacteria that like the crappy food don't like when they don't get what they want. So when we eat good food, the bad bacteria secrete chemicals that make us feel crappy. And so that's what I mean by they're training us. They reward us when we do something that's bad for us by giving a short burst of feel good. But when we really do something that's good for us, they punish us. So one way that we can fix this with the bad bacteria is by creating an environment that's good for the good bacteria. And the natural process of introducing more and more good bacteria into our digestive tract eventually decreases the population of bad bacteria. And I'll be talking about this, I mentioned, all month. And if you have any questions, raise your hand. So that's the first piece. The second piece is, how in the world does this connect to our brain? Okay, great. They make these, the good bacteria make these neurotransmitters and these other chemicals that not only help us feel good, but they also help with inflammation as well. Global inflammation, and also brain inflammation, which is one of the things that is really associated with depression, for example, and brain fog, for example. So there is a nerve called the vagus nerve, VAGUS. That is it's the 10th cranial nerve. And the 10th cranial nerve goes all the way from our brain down to our digestive tract, and its fibers, the fibers of the vagus nerve, are intimately interwoven throughout all of the layers of the digestive tract, except that very most innermost layer. And the vagus nerve not only goes from the brain to the gut, but it also goes from the gut to the brain. So it's a two-way communication process. And when our friendly gut bacteria are happy and thriving, they make signals that directly talk to our nervous system that cause us to have better moods and also less inflammation. And believe it or not, which is one of the ways that I got interested in this, is that they're doing this through the endocannabinoid system, the ECS, the endocannabinoid system, which is what cannabis uses to make us feel high, but B also is involved in reducing pain signaling and in affecting seizure responses with cannabis through this endocannabinoid system. So not only do the gut bacteria, friendly ones, talk to our own immune and nervous system through the endocannabinoid system, it goes both ways, and our nervous system also can talk to the gut bacteria. So this sense of communication through the vagus nerve is intimately hardwired into our gut-mind complex. So that's the basics of the physiology. That's the basics of the anatomy. And we are starting to build a model where we can show how anxiety and inflammation can be influenced by these positive creatures, the probiotics. Now, very interestingly, we're going to talk about some cannabis here, both CBD and THC, but CBD not only helps humans directly through our endocannabinoid system and other pathways to reduce anxiety, to help us sleep better, to help with certain chronic pain syndromes, but CBD also affects our friendly gut bacteria. When we take CBD orally, it can benefit the beneficial gut bacteria like the lactobacillus, like the bifidobacterium, that are key players in maintaining our gut health and our immune function and helping with nutrient production and also mood stabilization. But the CBD is also inhibits the bad bacteria. So it has a double-edged effect, not only on the bacteria that are good, but also it downregulates the bacteria that are bad. And so what part of what CBD is doing is not only is it tonifying and helping to have our own endocannabinoid system work better. And I realize some of you may not know what that is. So if you don't, raise your hand and we can talk about that. But it also improves, the CBD also improves communication between our gut and our brain for better mental functioning and reduced inflammation. Now, what about THC? And I tend not to talk as much about THC, but THC we don't have as many studies on, but we do have an interesting study on, there are animal studies. This particular study is a study on monkeys, and it's a low dose THC on monkeys. And what we found is by giving monkeys low doses of THC, not huge doses, but low doses, the monkeys in their brains have reduced neural inflammation. Also, it appears that the friendly gut bacteria are enhanced by this low dose THC in the monkeys, not in humans, as it enhances the endocannabinoid system. So the monkey study does demonstrate the potential, at least in humans, for THC to positively modulate this gut-brain axis by reducing inflammation and helping enhancing endocannabinoid levels in our own body. I found, especially with my patients with Crohn's disease, irritable bowel disease, and irritable bowel syndrome, which are digestive disturbances, that I have found, and I don't have any data to back this up other than clinical experience, but that lipid-based orals, so MCTs, which are medium chain triglycerides that come from coconut oils, I think those oral products may be affecting, in a topical way, immune functioning. And I do frequently recommend for, and again, I don't have any hard clinical data other than these N of 1, but I do find that a little tiny bit of THC can be very helpful for some of these patients. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have on that, but also the combination of CBD as well. And this is not something that I have patients do regularly over a long term, although certainly some of them do that. So I told you I was going to try to bring it into flow, didn't I? Well, well, let's try that. Because I think that we've talked about disease states, but I think we can also talk about these probiotics and in athletic performance. And when we think about athletic performance and the gut-brain barrier and friendly gut bacteria, I think of turmeric, because it's just really so good for inflammation in and of itself, let alone how it works through the gut bacteria. And I'm also a big fan of blueberry proanthocyanidins, which are bioflavonoids or flavonoid molecules, is a much easier way to say that. And what is really interesting, not only about turmeric and the blueberry, is that they are acting in at least 2 different ways in the body. One, they are actually changing the way our genes work. And we have studies on this. And I believe I posted on this today, earlier today in LinkedIn. So you can go check that post out if you want to, but I'm going to go into it a little bit deeper here. What happens is our DNA codes for proteins that are really what get the job done in our cells. The DNA helps create the molecular machinery that actually does the work. So the DNA is the coding of how it works. And when we consume polyphenols from blueberries or from turmeric, they actually change the way the genes express themselves for anti-inflammatory molecules. So that's one of the way they work is that they turn down inflammation in the digestive tract so that we have a less severe inflammatory response for those weekend warrior activities. And also it is a global response. So it also is happening in the central nervous system. And remember, we talked about that relationship between neural inflammation and brain fog. And certainly in certain types of depression, it's very strongly thought that there is an inflammation going on in the brain. The technical term is neural inflammation. So that's one of the ways these polyphenols work. And also polyphenols are found in green tea and in other plants. But I'm just really personally really like the berry flavonoids in the turmeric. That's just a personal preference. But what else do the polyphenols do in and around these gut bacteria is that they actually help the gut bacteria produce their own helpful molecules. And these helpful molecules can affect things in our cellular metabolism like energy production. So they can make our Krebs cycle and our mitochondria work better. They can protect against tissue damage through antioxidant mechanisms, and also very importantly, sugar and fat balance. They really help tonify those processes and also are involved in DNA repair. And just like it appears that THC helps with improving populations of our good bacteria, and just like CBD helps improve gut bacteria by increasing their population and hindering bad bacteria by decreasing their population, these polyphenols also help certain good bacteria in our gut grow, like the bifidobacteria or like the friendly lactobacilli, or another type of bacteria called the Akkermansia bacteria. And these bacteria can help improve both physical and mental mental processes. So to tie this back into flow states, the athletic performance, and there's a flow state therapist for the entire NBA now discussing how to have athletes accessing these flow activities. I think that the polyphenols in a lot of these plant compounds can also be helping through friendly bacteria. And I also think that they not only can help folks with peak performance, but can help everyday folks like me and you to perform better in our day-to-day jobs. So I've been talking for a long time. Any thoughts or questions on that? Because there's a number of different ways I can go next, but does anyone have any thoughts or questions? I was prepared to do a monologue. My coach said to me, I was like, Coach, there's nobody asking questions in my thing. Should I switch over to video? And she said, no, they're listening to you. At least hopefully some of you are. Keep doing it. And we can always switch to and do an additional video format later. But I would love to rather talk with you about what I think is important. Talk about what you think is important. But anyway, we have 15 more minutes. So let me go on. If you feel like it, raise your hand. I could go through some news of the week where I talk about certain news releases with studies that are kind of cool. But I'm kind of maybe interested in a little bit about talking about psychedelics, because psychedelics are known to help with chronic severe depression in short-term use. They're also very effective against trauma for certain individuals. And I'm talking about psychotherapy, assisted psychedelics, not tripping with your friends and going to a rave. and also probiotics and the use of probiotics to enhance the psychedelic experience. And we could also talk about meditative states and flow states, and how the flow state neurology and the meditative state neurology is actually mirroring what we are seeing with a lot of the new studies in psychedelic assisted therapies. So any thoughts or questions on that? Okay, I think I'll probably talk about this for about 10 minutes, and then I'll give folks another chance to raise your hand if that's how that's going to go. So, okay. All right. So probiotics produce the neurotransmitter, as I had mentioned, serotonin. And serotonin is in the family or class of molecules known as tryptamines. Tryptamines are also the same molecules that the psychedelics use, and those molecules tend to hit the serotonin HT2A receptors. So a lot of them are hitting the exact same pathways. Additionally, they're lipid-like molecules, or they have lipid affinities, so they very easily cross through the blood-brain barrier and then can address direct contact to our nervous system through the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve cell bodies are actually in the brainstem in the medulla oblongata, so you can get really quick communication directly to the brain through the vagus nerve from the gut. So as I said, so these are all tryptamine molecules. Another tryptamine molecule that you probably have heard of is serotonin, or mentioned serotonin, melatonin. Both melatonin and serotonin are affecting mood and sleep. And so certain configurations of this gut bacteria are associated with the same signaling pathways as psychedelic therapy. And we know from rat studies that the communication can go both ways when, and there's something that's a weird thing that's called a fecal transplant. When we do this in rats, we can see an instantaneous change in mood. But there is this hypothesis of how psychedelics through these serotonergic pathways could also be enhanced from serotonin that comes from the gut. There's a paper about this from the Department of Psychiatry in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And if you're interested, you can email, but they present this hypothesis that one of the psychosomatic mechanisms of the serotonin-based psychedelics is that they're working through gut microbes. And I think that enhancing the psychedelic experience therapeutically through talk therapy is very important, but there's also some indication that music therapy is very important in terms of the set and the setting. And what I love about this is I'm an amateur musician. I'm a folk musician. I play flute. It's a very, when we play music as opposed to just listen to music, but listening to music can get us into flow states, and dance is a flow state activity. But there's a beautiful textbook called This Is Your Brain on Music. And when we play music, especially with others, there is the entire brain lights up. It is one of the most, it is one of the ways that we use the most part of our brain is when we play music. And music goes in to our nervous system through the 8th cranial nerve. Remember that vagus nerve and the gut bacteria are working through 10th cranial nerve. So the music goes into the brain through the eighth cranial nerve, which also governs balance and hearing. And music is a flow state inducer, and psychedelics we think of as a flow state inducer. But there appears to be some significant data now that music influence through the eighth cranial nerve is complementing the bacterial influence through the 10th cranial nerve and initiating flow states. So I find this very interesting. And as an amateur musician, I'm very partial to the plight of artists who are trying to make a living, creating musical content. But wouldn't it be cool if artists who were able to write and compose music specifically for medical purposes, and then they could get, because music is patented, and that there could be another separate patenting process on the therapeutical aspects of music. So anyway, that's my thought on that. If anyone would like for me to go further down that rabbit hole, so to speak, and talk more about the psychedelics on that side, you can raise your hand. If you're not interested, maybe I'll talk about something else. No, I appreciate the heart there, buddy. And I understand if you may not want to ask a question, but thank you for the feedback. I guess that is an indication to go down the pathway of psychedelics. So let's talk a little bit about the neurology, and I'll make it simple for you. Just think of a network. We've gotten different networks to do different things in our brain. And one of the networks that we typically rely on, I get a thumbs up from Noah. Thank you, Noah. I really appreciate it. One of the things where our normal resting brain state is called the default mode network. It's just a fancy mode for what we're usually in most of the time. And the default mode network is a self-referential network where we're thinking about ourselves. What am I going to eat for dinner tonight? How am I going to pick the kids up? Okay, I got to get gas, and oh my goodness, we don't have any protein for dinner. Self-referential thinking that we think of all the time, default mode network. But when we enter flow states, that sense of default mode network gets down regulated and a different network comes up online. And I don't like the name of this network, but because it's called the task mode network. Task mode network, think of tasks. I think the reason it was named the task mode network is because sometimes when we're doing tasks, especially tasks that we're skillful in, we can get into a flow state. So for example, knitting is a task-oriented state where we can get really relaxed and almost in a meditative state. And I prefer that it would be called the skill mode network, because one of the ways that we access flow states is by doing something that is skillful, that we are particularly skilled at. And we're all skilled at something. Everybody's skilled at something. I think just about every nervous system is skilled at something, but we don't do these skillful acts all of the time. It might be for guys, I think we're really oriented in and around athletic activities, and they can certainly be extremely pleasurable, or even science can be a flow state activity where you're getting into certain aspects in the lab, and it's very consuming, and we almost forget about ourselves, and the day can go by very quickly, for example. So this task mode network / skill mode network is something that we can access. Well, don't you know that meditation also enhances this network, the skill mode network, the task mode network, not the default mode network where we're self-referential and only paying attention to what I need this, or what I want to do this, or when I talk to so-and-so, I'm going to say this and I'm going to tell them that. That's all self-oriented thinking. But when we enter these flow states, we're much less self-absorbed and much more have a much more potential for connection with the environment. Well, flow states, as I mentioned, are the direct opposite neurologically of trauma. And they're also the direct opposite of some of these addiction pathways that we are involved in. And so one of the reasons why I have been wanting to do these live events is because it's really a good way to tie together a lot of different ideas and make them synthesized so that people can see that this holistic piece is not only interconnected, but that it makes sense biologically, and that there is a pretty good research base to at least begin to explore some of these areas further. So the error in thinking, I think, in a lot of conventional pharmacology is that we're focused on biologic pathways, which are important. The serotonin pathway, for example, is important, and the opiate signaling pathways are important. And I'm not denigrating those, but I think that we also have to look at not just how individual neurons and pathways are looking, but also examine the whole brain level and these network levels, and also realize that these inputs to our sense of well-being are coming not only from what we're taking as a pill, whether that be an antidepressant or a mushroom product that has psychedelic properties associated with talk therapy, but that also what our diet is involved in these processes, and also other aspects of our environment, such as the eighth cranial nerve, where music comes into play. And we all know, I think, instinctively as music, how that directly influences our mood and our activities, and really can get us into a full and wholly connected sense of self that is therapeutic in its own rights. So I really sincerely appreciate you guys staying tuned for the whole time. We've just got another minute or two left. If anyone has any thoughts or comments or questions, and if not, that's okay too. I came prepared. As my coach said, Jake, you need to be prepared to do monologues. And so that's what I just did for 45 minutes. Do drop me a line if you enjoyed it. I appreciate you coming. I will be doing this again. I'm not sure if I can do it next week because I will be out on the coast surfing all next week. But if I am in a place where I have a good connection, I will do this again. But I plan on doing these every Thursday in the same format. And I will also be adding video at some point in time. I'll also, with the video, be inviting guests on. If something I said resonated with you, please feel free to connect with me. Also, if you're wanting me to talk about anything else in any of these next talks, please feel free to do so. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I have licenses in Washington to practice medicine in Washington State and the state of California. I'm licensed to prescribe prescription drugs, but as naturopaths, we are also really tuned into the interconnectedness of physiology and how to influence them. So I very much thank you all for listening, and really appreciate you being here. I'll be doing more of these. And also, if you feel like it, drop me a note and let me know if you think that you'd think a video format might be better. Thank you so much. Guy, I saw you popping in and out. I appreciate you being here. Rebecca, thank you. Noah, thank you. Victor, thank you. And I will be back and look forward to being in touch. Thanks, and have a great week, everybody.